Hello and welcome to Apache Karaf Essentials. I'm Jamie Goodyear. Today we're going to talk about modular monoliths. Up next. So today we're talking about modular monoliths, or as we call them at Apache Karaf, Moduliths. This architecture style has been promoted by users of Apache Karaf for quite some time and is starting to come back into popularity. So let's take a look about what this actually is as a architectural style, and then we're going to take a look at a concrete demo and just kind of walk through and see what these are all about and how Apache Karaf help build these. Let's start off with the first part of this, modules, the modular part of this architecture style. The definition I like to go with is talking about we look at parts of an application and we try to isolate the functionality into each component, each module, each bundle or jar we need to build. It is these jars that become like building blocks, not unlike building things with Lego, where we have a piece that need to go with another piece to build up our bigger application. Each one of these things can be built in parallel if we have enough of the design put together for what our application is going to look like. So you can think like we have a bunch of API jars and implementation jars, and the combination of all of these is going to build out our application. So we're able to build these things out, and each one of these things are independent. So you can possibly have a repository for your APIs, a repository for their implementations, repositories for each different sets of services you need to build out to make the overall application. The way this will look on a whiteboard would be that you would have a whole bunch of modules drawn out. These would be given names such as like front-end API, back-end API. There would be a piece saying like data access layer. There might be another part said JMS access to something like ActiveMQ brokers or to Kafka streams. Depends on your application what these are going to be named and what they're doing, but that's the general idea. We're trying to put specific functionality into each one of these modules. Of course, in Apache Karaf, those would be bundles. So that's just to bring it over to our parlance. If we're looking at a bundle, just as a quick refresher on what those are, that is a standard jar. They contain a manifest like any other jar would, but in OSGI or Apache Karaf, that manifest has a lot of additional headers added into it to explains what dependencies it have, any services it needs to run at runtime or anything it provides at runtime. All of that stuff goes in there. Generally, inside of your bundle, you'd have a collection of packages that represent the work of this particular jar. In the most simple case, you'd have a package that might be, say, an API package with the interfaces that would be in that bundle. Enlarging our scope, if we have two separate bundles, one might be the API package, and another would be the implementation package. So interface in one, implementation concrete classes in the other. So when you want to put these together in a modular fashion for that kind of an architecture, you have your API jar and you have your impl jar. You put those together into JVM to get them running together. So let's talk about monoliths and what that means. That is the classic style of architecture that most of the industry has been using for decades. Really, we were doing this all the way up until when microservices became in vogue and everyone had to split things up into smaller pieces. From our point of view, this is when you have an application that potentially lives all in the one repository or very few repositories, and it is considered to be one big thing. So if you have, say, front-end components and back-end components, everything's together, it's versioned together. This is version 1.00 of our application, and if we make a front-end application update, we're now 101, and now we do a back-end, it's 102. It gets a little bit complex when you do things in that larger monolithic style, but we're kind of familiar with this. So a very standard way of thinking of this, if we want to do a little diagram, would be, hey, we have an application with the front-end controller and a model that talks to some database. And this code base is version 1.0, and it's delivered and built as one thing. And this is where we have all that traditional complexity of, well, what happens if I have multiple teams working on different parts of this application? We're starting to step on each other, and it becomes a bit of a challenge. So where do we go from here? This is when we introduce the concept of the modular monolith. The modular monolith is the style in which we say, hey, we know we have all these different components of our application. We're now going to treat each one of those components with its own life cycle, its own software development life cycle at that point. To say that the front end, the controller, and the model, they're going to be versioned independently. They can be developed independently. We can now start deploying them and updating them independently, with obviously within reason. If API changes, you have to keep your implementation up to that API, but there is that ability for us now to break things apart and be able to address the challenges that development teams have, where we have everybody working on a larger piece of software. Now we have those nice delineations where we can start breaking this apart and giving ease of access for developers to build things out. So what does Apache Karaf bring to the table now to build out modular monoliths? Like, what does Karaf bring? Why is this a good idea to do it on this particular platform? Well, one of the key things that Karaf brings you, other than just OSGI and the functionalities that it brings to the table for modular builds, is that Karaf introduces a concept of a feature. Think of that as being, here is my blueprint, my assembly list for all of my modules. I want to bring in this particular set, and when these configurations and these modules are put together at runtime, that equals my application. So what does this all look like when we run this into JVM? So when we run our Apache Karaf node, the JVM fires up. There's a set of services that are coming from OSGI and Karaf that is provided underneath all of the bundles that are being poured in. This goes back actually to the original reason why we have a Karaf as the logo for Apache Karaf. The whole idea is you could pour a ball of wine into the Karaf and let it breathe and give it a better flavor. Our idea here is that you pour in your application jars, all those bundles and all their interactions that they have with each other. And underneath the hood, we have a console and web console provided by Karaf. So that's the ability to SSH into the running JVM or use the web console to get into the running JVM, to do maintenance, modify things, update things, take a look at the health and the runtime characteristics of your application. There's a deployer. That's the functionality that says, hey, give me this jar, this WAR file, this bundle, and get it into the system and up and running and provision what's required for it. There is the logging subsystem. So all of your bundles, when it's logging out, we have that all coordinated into the one centralized logging, so that it becomes easier to trace things through as it goes from one part of your system to another. There's the configuration admin that's built in. That's that dynamic system that the bundles can reach out to get their properties, their configurations, and as they are updated, the bundles can then listen for those so that they can also update to change values or configurations. And there's the service registry. That's where you're thinking about, hey, we are registering all these APIs and implementations, and things are coming and going, what services are available. All those things coming together. In a way, this is kind of similar to when you think about how a Kubernetes system lives, where there is a control plane, and it has all these additional services are provided so that all the pods can get deployed out onto nodes and start interacting with each other. This is not distributed. This is all on the one JVM, but it's kind of a similar line of thought that's happening here. So let's take a look at a concrete demo. We're going to look at the code and part of how it's wired together, but we're not going to dig deep into playing with the runtime. The code's all on our GitHub, so you can pull the code and run it locally and dive real deep into it. So at a very high level, what I built out was a very simple implementation of a battleship game. Nothing too crazy there. The key pieces that I wanted to be able to show with this demo, however, is the organization of making this into a modular monolith. So what that meant for us is that there's a single application battleship game, and we wanted to provide a couple of aspects. One would be the game itself. So there has to be a front end. In my case, I chose JavaFX. It could have been a web client. I just wanted to play with JavaFX. No real technical reason that it had to be that. But it would have a back end that we would need to talk to. So there'd be an API and an implementation of that, and that would probably have to talk to some back end database. There would be another domain, which would be we would want to be some kind of a game lobby where people would log in, see what running games there are, other players there are, they can match and pair, and that would be their way of gaining access to finding another player to play the game with. Finally, there would be some kind of a admin portal that someone could go into the back end and take a look at stats, how many games are being played, if there's some player had to be banned, that kind of administrative task. But the way we can look at that within our application would be, hey, we know we have a couple of different domains of work that can be done, and we can break those into saying, hey, there's a front-end piece that would have to be built, there'd have to be interfaces that we could put together, and there would be some back-end parts and a data layer. So you can start working these out as being that there's a bunch of modules that can be split out and work out independently. And that's the idea behind the modular monolith. It's one application, but we can break this out into a bunch of parts that can be worked upon independently. Something I would point out when we're using Karaf features, there's a bit of a secret piece to this, is that we can, since we know we have certain domains to this application, we can say, hey, I want to target that part of the application for deployment in my JVM. So I can say, I want the game portion, or I want this home lobby portion, or this backend admin portion. So if we're thinking about deploying this across multiple JVMs, I could say that I know I need lots of game implementation. So I can say target of the game, install here on this node, this node, this node, this pod, this pod, this pod. Same thing for the backend. I only need 1 or 2 lobbies, and I need 1 admin instance. We don't have to run all this on a single JVM. We could be splitting this out, but since we're talking about it as a monolithic deployment, let's just stick to that simpler deployment model. I will also, just for the illustrative portion of this, point out that I added in some version numbers to each one of these modules. The reason for that is just to drive home the point that each one of these can be independently developed, improved, then deployed, and that's that extra flexibility, that dynamic ability to upgrade this monolith, but without having to do a full cross-the-board update to the entire application. We just target pieces of it. That is a very key, excellent piece that Karaf enables for us. So let's take a look in the IDE now at what this code looks like. So if you go into GitHub and you pull our project, what you're going to find in there is there's going to be 2 main folders. One is going to be the client, which is the JavaFX client for playing Battleship. We're not going to dive into that code, but feel free, have a good look through there. Under the server side, the Modulith that we want to look at, we can see we have our min and our home and our game modules. We also have a data store. This is just encapsulating the ability to talk to some backend data store. Just to simplify things, I didn't want to have to talk to an actual database. This is just simulating for us. And the important part for what we want to talk about modular monoliths is the features capability that we get from Karaf. So what this provides us, this XML file, it is defining what is required for the JVM to be able to install and run this application. Internally, we have this thing pointing to Apache CXF. We're using that for RESTful calls. We have a collection of dependencies. You'll notice that we have this little underscore before it. The reason we do that is that when we're in the Karaf console and we want to list out a list of features that we have available to us, ones that start with that little underscore, they don't get listed. So it's a way of hiding some of the complexities of an application. So what this is doing is saying, hey, here's what our Moduliths application, its dependencies are, and we know we need to grab all of those and have it running in a JVM. This part of the features file is starting to list off each of those domains, the admin, the actual game backend, and the home lobby. We could target any one of those specifically and just deploy that part on our JVM. What we are going to do in our demo part here is run the Moduliths demo. That's going to install all 3 parts directly to the JVM. We like to do it this way. So when we're running Karaf, we just want to run the whole Modulith, the entire monolithic application. It'll put all 3 parts in one go, and if we want to spread it across multiple JVMs, that's how we just target them. So let's start up a instance of Apache Karaf. This one in particular is 446. We'll take a look quickly just to say that, hey, this one is currently empty. I'm going to grab the installation command for this project. So what I'm doing here is I'm adding a feature repository. What that is pointing to is a space in my local M2 repo, that's my Maven repository, that has the XML file. I'm just telling Karaf, hey, this is where you'd grab that file, so now it's available for it to have a look at it. So if I do a feature info on Modulith, you'll see that there's one here called demo. We have all three of those main domain targets available. So if I do a feature install of that Modulith demo, all three sets of those domains, so all the API jars, the WAR files, the implementations, the supporting dependencies, will all get pulled in and deployed into my running Karaf. So we can see here now on the listing side, there's the admin API and impl, there's the game API impl, the home, there is things like the Jackson bindings, the data store. All of the parts that we need to run this application has now been installed and made up and running. The cool part here now is that any part of this, if we want to update it, if I had those separate repositories, I could just pull the data store impl and update that, and then I can come back in and update that part of the file. Of course, there's a lot more to discuss about how does Apache Karaf features work and how to use the update feature and different ways we can go about updating bundles. What this talk was supposed to do was just to show you the general concept, what is the architecture of a modular monolith and how does Karaf enable that for you. So please pull this set of code, have a lot of fun with it. The code is not meant to be pretty for the game, it's meant to just show you how all these parts come together, and that modular monoliths is a way of being able to solve the complexities of having large applications running on a single JVM and with multiple resources working on it at the same time, and how you can manage it. A big piece of this that I will want to do in a future video will be semantic versioning. That's a piece of the secret sauce for how you make modular monoliths easier to live with, but we'll do that for a future video. Speaking of videos, I always love to draw attention to our Apache Karaf Essentials series. We have quite a few videos in this series now posted online. Please check them out and watch videos and like and leave comments. We always love to be able to have chats with you. That being said, please like and subscribe to our series, and have a great day.